So, welcome everyone to the April meeting of the New Jersey Butterfly Club. And I'm glad to introduce our speaker, Jack McDonough, who is presenting to us on the Cape May Monarch Monitoring Project. Jack, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Um, Thank you for all being here. And so, as a brief introduction to the project, the Monarch Monitoring Project is currently the longest running research program for monarch butterflies in the world. Started in the early 90s. And it is a program that was started by New Jersey Audubon. Right now, it is directly overseen by the Cape May Bird Observatory. So myself and the coordinators of the research program and our migration monitoring at CMBO oversee the project. And every year, it hires two seasonal field naturalists to conduct a lot of our on-ground research, and I help train them and conduct our research in all our public programming, as well as some wildlife gardening maintenance and a few other things. But before I can tell you too much about our project, I have to take you back in time a little bit to the mid-70s. And I'm also going to switch countries here. And this is a view in the mountains of Mexico, in the Michoacan, west of Mexico City, on the part of the Grand Sierra Madre mountain range. And back in 1975, there were some researchers that went to Mexico and were looking for overwintering sites of monarch butterflies, Ken Brugger and Catalina Trail. And what we know today is monarchs roost by the millions in these oil fir trees at about 10 to 11,000 feet elevation, where it's very cool. But it's also not too cold that the frost or any cold temperatures will actually kill these butterflies. But they congregate in these huge clusters, and monarchs only weigh about half a gram, but so many monarch butterflies can congregate on single branches that the weight of them can actually snap those branches in half, which is pretty extraordinary. At one point in the mid-70s, there was an estimated 1 billion monarch butterflies actually overwintering in these mountains in Mexico. And you can see here just absolutely stuffed into the trees. And this was the August 1976 issue of National Geographic with Catalina Trail on the cover. A year following their discovery of these incredible roosts in Mexico. So we now knew that there was this huge congregation of butterflies, one of the largest congregations of insects in the world. And no one really had too much of a grasp of where they're coming from, exactly how they were getting there. And they're just starting to figure out just that climate, why it was so perfect. But they had a hunch about something, and like many species of animals, many creatures move south during the fall to avoid the harshness of the winters in the north, and to head toward more tropical regions in the south. Where they can spend the winter more properly and cold temperatures don't kill them. Maybe there's an abundance of food and a few other factors for their migration. And New Jersey is an interesting place for migration. It's one of the best locations really in the world. Reason why all has to do with geography. And as you can see here, down all the way at the bottom of New Jersey, where Cape May is, there is a south-facing peninsula there, and is very prominent. And from the gap of the Delaware Bay, it sticks out kind of far. Um, so for any migrating creatures, heading over the ocean is very dangerous. And the reason why is, especially if there's some kind of westerly wind type, these migrating creatures can get blown offshore, and if they're over water for too long, they can get exhausted and fall into the water and drown, especially for a tiny little monarch butterfly that is not going to do very well in strong winds or in water. Heading over water in any capacity is very dangerous. So the predominant wind type during the fall is northwest, and that pushes a lot of migrants up against the coast. So naturally, between avoiding water by hugging the coast as much as they can, and the predominant wind types during the fall being northwest, pushing more abundance toward the coastline. Generally speaking, the coastal plain along the east coast holds the most migrating creatures during the fall. So what we see in Cape May is all these migrants coming down from directly the north of us, whether it's straight off from breeding grounds in boreal forests and tundra, whether it's following along the coastline, or whether certain migrants are coming over from the Great Lakes region. And what happens is when we get these northwest winds, especially, you have a funneling effect of different kinds of winged creatures. That includes birds, butterflies, bats, dragonflies. And they all get funneled toward the Cape May Peninsula and concentrated in incredible numbers. Some of the biggest days of the fall season, there can be as many as 3 million birds that will pass over Cape May Point in a single morning, which is just incredible. And this results in a lot of monarchs getting pushed down here as well for those same reasons. And we'll see strings of monarchs just moving through the dunes. And what's interesting about Cape May Point is because there's this large water mass of the Delaware Bay, the monarch butterflies that get concentrated to the point have nowhere really to go. They very rarely cross the Delaware Bay directly. Usually has to be very sunny with a lot of thermals and a very light northeast wind, usually around or below 10 miles per hour, for them to cross. The northeast assists them from getting blown out too far. So most of the case, it's not those perfect conditions. And monarch butterflies that get concentrated down here are forced to go northbound up the Delaware Bay shore to an area where the water gap is easier to cross, where perhaps they can see the other side or detect less salinity. Then they'll move south from there. So we see these incredible northbound, ironically, movements during the fall, past Cape May Point, where we see them going west, and then eventually up by Sunset Beach, and over at East Point Lighthouse in Cumberland County, I've seen just as big monarch flights as I have from the point. And of course, similar to what they do in Mexico, monarch butterflies will communally roost, usually on conifers, whether that's instinctive or whether that's simply because these conifers tend to be wind resistant and a little bit warmer. It's hard to say. Could be a combination of both. But usually in October and even into November sometimes, when nightly temperatures start to drop, usually around 50 degrees or so, we will see monarch butterflies congregating in large numbers, usually on black pines and cedars at Cape May Point. And amongst those monarch butterflies is a plethora of other migrants. As I mentioned, birds. Uh, Cape May is particularly famous for its raptor migration, like the sharp-shinned hawk. You can see thousands past Cape May Point. Little songbirds like this black-throated green warbler, and it's eating a blue dasher dragonfly there, which is another low abundance migrant that we'll see in the fall. They tend to migrate a little bit heavier in July. Um, Multiple other species of dragonflies, most abundantly common green darners and saddlebag species, glider species, swamp darners. In lower abundance early in the season, we'll even see some comet darners pictured here moving past. Um, Multiple species of bats, most abundantly eastern red bats, but also silver-haired bats, like pictured here. Hoary bats, we even see some seasonal movements of brown bats, and even one time we photographed a tricolored bat, which is an endangered species. um, and of course, a larger diversity of additional butterfly species, like the sleepy orange that we see usually moving past Cape May Point in decent numbers, especially in recent years. Um, so Cape May has been world famous for its migration for a very long time. The Hawk Watch started back in the 70s, which is really the first project of New Jersey Audubon Cape May Bird Observatory to monitor any of this migration phenomenon in any way. And Dick Walton, man with a monarch hat on, he was a naturalist, is a naturalist from Massachusetts, and he came down the Cape May really to witness the incredible raptor and bird migration, for which by the late 80s was catching on as being one of the best birding hotspots in the country. And he was quickly distracted by something a little bit different, and that was the monarchs that were moving past by the thousands. And he went around to a lot of friends and local naturalists and said, "Hey, this is incredible. Somebody should really be studying this." And all the responses that he got back was, "Yeah, somebody really should." Nobody was particularly interested in doing anything with the monarchs. So he enlisted the help of Dr. Lincoln Brower, who at the time was one of the leading monarch biologists in the US. And the two of them came together in 1990 and officially started this project. And so they started playing around the first 2 years with different methods of counting monarch butterflies, trying to figure out what the best ways were to collect data year to year. And by 1992, they figured out a pretty good system that worked for them. Um, and one of those things was in 1992, additionally, Monarch Watch, which is a foundation at the University of Kansas, started coming out with the first tags, or at least one of the most accessible tags, to put on a monarch butterfly. They only weigh about a tenth of a gram. Monarch's about a half a gram, so it's very light. And basically, it has a little individualistic code on there, 4 letters and 3 numbers. There's no technology to it. And we put it right on the underside of the left hind wing, right in the middle of the discal cell. And when we release the monarch, when it shows up elsewhere, recovery teams all down the East Coast in Mexico look out for those tags. And if they see one, they can report that code to monarchwatch.org, and everything gets published every winter. Domestic recoveries within the US and recoveries from Mexico. You can even go on their website and look at the recoveries yourself if you're interested. So at the time, we knew that monarch butterflies were conjugating in Mexico for about 15 years, but we had no idea exactly where they were coming from. And a lot of scientists did not possibly believe that a little butterfly from in the Northeast or Canada could possibly make it all the way down to Mexico. And it was largely assumed that the monarchs that ended up in the Michoacan forests were likely from the southern United States, maybe other areas of Mexico. Wasn't really well known. And it was only 3 years later that the first monarch butterfly that was tagged at Cape May Point showed up in these oil fir trees in the mountains of Mexico, these beautiful transvolcanic mountain ranges down there. And in the years that followed, they were found in many other places along the way, as well as very many additional recoveries from Mexico. So, mind you, to find a tagged monarch amongst millions of butterflies in Mexico is very difficult. Even more so, a monarch butterfly that is specifically from Cape May. So, although some of these numbers might seem small for the amount of years and the amount that have been tagged, we estimate that it represents a much larger number of the ones that successfully make it there. But you can see they follow the coastline, go around the Gulf. There's about 2 central flyways in Texas. A lot of these eastern ones go along the coast. A lot of the ones from the Midwest go kind of right through the center part of Texas. You can see 2 monarch butterflies that likely got blown offshore, possibly from a storm, and accidentally ended up in the Bahamas. Um, Hopefully, they're sitting on a beach with martinis somewhere, but it just goes to show in a more real sense how dangerous it is, this migration for these butterflies, and just how many end up getting blown off course and will usually die over the ocean. Um, However, there is a year-round population in Florida, and we have had some evidence of monarchs that we've tagged from Cape May that moved south during the fall and went to Florida and never left. So there's still things that we are discovering about monarchs and their preferences. So the first thing to understand about monarch migration is that they are a multi-generational species. This confuses a lot of people, but the main thing to think about is during the fall, it is a true migration. They're going from point A to point B. One monarch that is born in New Jersey during the fall is going to go all the way to Mexico in theory and make it there in one generation. But during the spring, it's what we call a dispersal, and it takes multiple generations for them to get back up to, let's say, New Jersey or Canada to breed for the summer. So, generally, the way I think of this is during the fall, they're trying to avoid the cold weather, trying to stay ahead of it, try to get to Mexico as quickly as possible. Monarch lifespans are very short, usually 2 to 6 weeks. But the ones that end up in Mexico, that perfect climate at that 10,000 feet elevation in those oil fir trees is just cool enough that's basically like nature's refrigerator. And it allows these monarchs to go into a low energy state, similar to a torpor, like what hummingbirds go through at night, and allows them to overwinter for several months. And the total lifespan of a monarch during the fall that goes to Mexico, overwinters, and survives till the spring can be as long as 9 months. So monarch butterflies are not only the longest migrating butterfly in a single generation in the world, but also the longest living butterfly in the world, which is really remarkable. So happens is in the spring, the monarchs will, through the state of diapause and day lengths changing and temperatures rising, they will leave those forests in Mexico and they'll disperse to the northern area of the country, the southern United States, maybe around Texas. They will lay eggs, die off, and the next two generations will start to disperse northward. And they are just looking for any kind of habitat. A monarch that is of that first generation could stay in Texas and never leave, or it could go all the way to Canada and everywhere in between. So these monarchs are really just looking for resources all along the way, looking for those host plants, the milkweed and the Asclepias genus. So this migration is really paired with what we believe since the dawn of the Ice Age, where milkweed really started to expand northward into the continental US and Canada, whereas originally it was more of a tropical species of plant. So monarchs are unique in the state that they do not have the physiology capable to overwinter as pupa or in any kind of larval stage like most species of butterflies do. So when the winter comes, they will die off. So they don't have the physiology capable to stay here. So they have to go somewhere warmer, but also not cold enough that will kill them. So this is a more illustrative example of that. So you can see the arrows. This is an example of spring dispersals in yellow and fall dispersals in red. So you can see that non-migratory population in Florida. So it is generally believed that all the monarchs east of the Rockies end up in Mexico, and most of the monarchs west of the Rockies end up in overwintering sites in coastal California, between Pacific Grove and Monterey, down to areas of Santa Barbara. And this is kind of an example of that in California, where it shows coastal areas where it's very similar climate to Mexico in some ways, where the temperatures are just perfect. However, the California western monarchs have a whole lot less habitat out there than the monarchs do in Mexico, so it's a much smaller overwintering population than the ones we see in the Michoacan. So one of the first things that Dick and Dr. Lincoln Brower did to monitor monarch numbers through Cape May was they actually did a road census from Higbee Beach Wildlife Management Area and ended at the point. So the idea here was to drive about 20 miles per hour down these roads with handheld clickers and to click every monarch that you'd see along the way. And you'd break it down to get monarchs per hour that were moving through Cape May. I think their general idea here was to hit as many different habitat types as possible. So when we get northwest winds and we get really big movements of monarchs, Cape May Point is always best because they're moving quite aggressively through the dunes. But on different kinds of days where the winds are out of the east, or if the winds are really flat and it's hot and sunny, monarchs are dispersing in search of nectar. They might not necessarily be hugging the coast as much if the wind speeds are lower. So along kind of the northern half of that route, it would go through a lot of farm field areas where monarchs are more interior on days where they're not as heavily migrating. So this was done for about 30 years. And this is a general look at what some of that data revealed. You can see a huge spike in 1999 there. Generally a slight decline, but you can see, relatively speaking, migration numbers that we've seen have been fairly stable. And the populations here in the Northeast are generally believed to be the strongest populations of monarchs, probably in North America. However, one thing that was published from that data set is something that is probably something that a lot of you can relate to, and that is monarch butterflies are starting to migrate later and later into the fall. So historically, we used to see the largest numbers of monarchs hitting in late September. And now we're starting to see those big numbers really more in early to mid-October. And in 2022, we actually extended the project for the first time into November. Historically, the project always ended on October 31st, but the project now runs to November 14th to compensate for this change. We actually had a day in the first week of September, or first week of November this past fall, where we had, I believe it was around 300 monarch butterflies move past Cape May Point in a single day. And we'll talk about why that is more of an issue later. What we do now is something that myself and Tom Reed, our migration coordinator, came together on. And Trek Talon is a worldwide website that was started in the Netherlands and is now used by most of the biggest bird migration sites in the world for counting migrating species. So what's really neat about this website is when you're running it, if you're connected to a internet source, it allows you to live stream everything as you're entering it. So people can go on the website and see what you're counting as it comes. So this is something that the Cape May Bird Observatory has been using for several years for its Hawk Watch and its Morning Flight and its Avalon Sea Watch and its Spring Watch project. And last year we started doing this with migrating insects. So for the longest time, the Monarch Monitoring Project was just narrowly focused on migrating monarchs, of course. But now we really take in the full diversity of migrating butterflies and dragonflies that are moving past Cape May Point. We had one day this past fall where we had over 30,000 common green darners move over Cape May Point in a single afternoon. So it's movements like that that we really try to capture during the field season. And yeah, you can see this was November 7th, 94 monarchs northwest on that day. It's just incredible how late their migration is really shifting. I mean, even the butterfly diversity here in general, you'd think this list would have been from September. So generally, what we see in Cape May is, at least from the butterfly side, a mix of different kinds of butterfly migrants. So we have what I like to call just simply northbound migrating butterflies. So these are southern species that move up the coastal plain to try to rapidly produce. So usually in late summer, for species that have multiple broods, they reach these peaks in populations that are very overwhelming. And a lot of these southern sulfurs and skippers will disperse northward in search of host plants and new habitat. It's generally believed to be a tactic for trying to expand their natural range. So one of the most common of those we'll see will be Acola skippers, long-tailed skippers, Even though fiery skippers breed sporadically in the state, there's a huge surge in abundance of those during the fall. We get cloudless sulfurs in really heightened numbers as the fall progresses from about late July. And uh, um, we'll even see things like sleepy orange. Rarely, when there's eruption years, we'll see things like Brazilian skippers and little yellows. Um, and then we have the southbound migrants, um, classic species of butterflies that have the ability to overwinter as adults in most places, um, but is generally believed that a lot of these butterflies, like question marks, mourning cloaks, red admirals, sometimes even buckeyes to a lesser extent, are trying to move from more northern areas um, where it is too cold for them to overwinter as adults. So, generally think that um, local question marks and local mourning cloaks in this region in the mid-Atlantic, it's just warm enough for them to be here. Um, so the way you think about it is in the same respect, blue jays, for example. Blue jays are a year-round species here, but they migrate south during the fall by the hundreds. These ones are coming from boreal areas in Canada. So we think that the huge influxes of these more common species are probably coming from the north of us, looking for more mild areas to overwinter as, or simply just following the nectar as they go farther south. As it gets colder in New England, there's no nectar, so they go south looking for food. So those are two general working theories. Could be a little of both, of course. Um, there's a picture of a question mark butterfly moving through the dunes. It's one of the more common species of butterflies we'll count migrating during the fall, as well as the spring, actually, in some cases. Um, One thing that we do see is sphinx moth migration as well. This is very evident in the more common species like snowberry clearwing and hummingbird moth. But we also see white-line sphinx movements during the fall. And every once in a while, we've even been able to document uh, what we believe are really like vagrant species of sphinx moths, in the same way that vagrant species of butterflies can show up here. Um, One exciting find this past fall was the Titan Sphinx that clearly had some kind of eruption this past fall. Seems like their phenology is right for that, but it's dominantly a Midwestern species, and we had a lot of prevailing westerly wind types when we saw this individual. There are not many naturalist records um, really in this region, the Mid Atlantic, so it was an interesting find. So, this is one of the things that I really can't stress enough is, especially in New Jersey, where we do such a poor job of protecting our coastline. Um, there's an incredible amount of migrating insects that are going through the dunes. Of course, we have hundreds of thousands of monarch butterflies, as well as other butterfly diversity, sphinx moths, tens of thousands of dragonflies, um, and maritime habitat and dunes off the beaches are really important because number one, they provide shelter from winds and they provide warmth. Things like the pine trees that I was talking about, the monarchs roost on, but also seaside goldenrod blooms really heavily in the dunes during the fall. Um, and this is one of the main nectar sources that monarchs use to build the fat reserves they need to make their migration. And of course, birds benefit from it too, like this black pole warbler. other species like Nashville and orange crown warblers will actually take nectar from goldenrod. Also eat small migratory flies that will congregate around the flowers. Um, so I think, especially we see it in Cape May, everyone wants this big beach house and everybody wants a restaurant with a view of the ocean. Um, but we have to start thinking about at what cost this is coming, because the migration and the conservation of monarch butterflies doesn't simply revolve around the breeding grounds in the north and the overwintering in the grounds in the south. That the whole migratory system really has to be taken into account. Um, and protecting our coastlines is so vital. And that's why having things like monarch way stations and fall blooming nectar sources in our backyards and business properties, things like asters and goldenrods and thoroughworts and species like that that are going to bloom late into the fall are so important, especially with these monarch butterflies migrating later and later. One of the biggest problems that we see with monarchs migrating south later is that they're missing some of the key blooming periods of a lot of these coastal plain plants. So there's less food for them than there used to be, um, a decade ago and earlier. So we're starting to see the mortality rate of monarch butterflies going up a lot more, seeing less and less show up in Mexico and other places. So that's one of the big things that you guys can do really to help not only monarchs but a plethora of other migrating wildlife, is really the focus on those fall blooming wildlife gardens. Um, One of the exciting things that Dr. Lincoln Brower really helped to forefront in science was discovering why monarchs are orange. Um, so when monarchs are caterpillars, they host on milkweed species, and there are compounds in the milkweed leaves called cardiac glycosides. It's a toxin. And monarch caterpillars go through multiple instars. They molt their exoskeletons as they grow. So they'll go through about 5 of those. By the second instar, they've been able to consume enough of these compounds that they gradually start to become toxic themselves. And it's that toxicity that actually gives them this orange coloration as a warning signal. The predator is not to eat them because they're poisonous. So in nature, we call that posmatism. And Dr. Lincoln Brower did this really famous experiment where he hand fed a blue jay every day of its life. He reared it, and one day he decided to feed it a monarch. Interestingly, the monarch, or the blue jay, gobbled it up, and pretty soon it got sick and it threw up. And the next day, he actually tried to hand feed it a monarch again after it had fully recovered, and it threw up at the site of the monarch. It was in a few science magazines, and it was famously known as the barfing blue jay. But just goes to show just how toxic these monarch butterflies are to especially vertebrates. So this cardiac glycoside affects things with chambered hearts. So species like birds and mammals can't eat a monarch. But insects, invertebrates, things like praying mantis and spiders can. So this is a really important part of monarch migration, because they have to go south with all these other things that can eat them. All these different kinds of birds that are migrating diurnally with them. So if it wasn't for that bright coloration, a lot of these monarchs would not make it. However, sometimes birds will still try especially young birds that don't know any better. On days when we have northeast winds, which are usually the prime winds for our falcon flights at Cape May Point, I'll usually see about 30 to 40% of the monarchs that day with ripped wings because they get grabbed by merlins and kestrels, and then they'll realize that it's toxic and they distasteful and they'll let it go. But by that point, a little butterfly being in the talons of a falcon doesn't go very well. So they get a little ripped up. But amazingly, monarchs can still fly after losing up to 70% of their wing mass. I've seen monarchs with only two wings chugging down the dunes trying to migrate, and you'd be surprised how well they can move. So, one of the big problems that we have in Cape May, like in many areas, are invasive mantids. So a lot of people, for some reason, think that praying mantis are protected in the United States and that it's illegal to kill them. That is not true. Actually, 4 out of the 5 species that we typically see in New Jersey are introduced either from Asia or from Europe. The biggest of those, the Chinese mantis, are just gigantic and they can eat dozens of monarchs in a day sometimes. So one of the things that we do as part of the project is later in the fall when these mantids are laying their oothecas, we go around the state parks and some of the nature conservancy properties and fish and wildlife properties, and we collect the egg cases, the oothecas that can hold up to 400 larvae in a single one. And it was something that I had started about 4 years ago, and since then, at least the presence of local praying mantis, Cape May Point has significantly reduced, which is great. Of course, we leave all the native Carolina mantis oothecas, but the Chinese ones are real distinctive. They're boxy, like the one pictured here. So for the longest time, this little guy, the Viceroy, was thought to be a monarch mimic. So in nature, we call that Batesian mimicry. A few years ago, there's some papers published proving that viceroys actually do get a toxin from certain willow trees that they host on. It's just much less than the monarch's toxic taste. And several other species of Danis to the south of here, the queen and the soldier are darker than monarchs, and the viceroys down there, often referred to as the Florida viceroy, are also dark. So they all mimic each other, and in nature we call it Mullerian mimicry. So the idea there is that per species, per population, the sacrifice of individuals is much less than if they all had their own different colors, while birds and other predators are learning that they're toxic, which is very interesting. So getting to some conservation points about monarch butterflies, one of the most significant things that you see in headlines and elsewhere is that the forests in Mexico are getting smaller and smaller. A lot of it is illegally logged in those mountain ranges. The Mexican government does the best they can, really, to try to protect at least good portions of these forests. Lots of them are protected as sanctuaries for the monarchs. However, cartel presence and illegal logging does take place in those mountains that are a little out of control. And there's a whole lot less forest than there used to be for them there. However, there's also just less monarchs occupying those forests in general year to year, regardless of the habitat. that's available. So that's one of the things that's kind of misunderstood about the situation in Mexico, is that there's just less monarchs actually showing up. Some scientists from this past year down in Mexico actually reported that they believe that some of the monarchs are not showing up in the same mountain ranges um, as they used to, and they might be trying to go elsewhere. Um, with climate change and droughts increasing in Mexico, a lot of the forest is receding kind of from the bottom up, and those peak temperatures at the top are getting warmer. It's becoming less favorable for monarch butterflies. Um, so, between the actual deforestation and habitat loss, on top of this kind of awkward um, climate change in these high elevation mountains, it's kind of causing a shift in the overwintering numbers down there. One of the most famous sanctuaries is El Rosario. Um, it's a beautiful area, awesome place to go. It's kind of the most touristy kind of a place, but what's cool is that you can actually go by horseback up into those mountains, which is really fantastic. Just adds to the adventure. Um, Additionally, in the same ways that monarchs are declining in Mexico, they're also declining in those overwintering sites in Mexico. Um, a big reason for this is primarily habitat loss, but also climate change. Um, and a lot of those areas that monarchs are breeding, um, kind of west of the Rockies, there, the droughts are causing less and less milkweed to be available, um, increased herbicide use, things like that. So the breeding population of monarchs really just hasn't been doing very well in the western United States, especially in more northern areas like Utah. So that's one of the bigger problems out there. These are some monarchs in Pacific Grove and Monterey. So, as I mentioned before, uh, one of the biggest problems that I see that jeopardizes the monarch migration right now is just a huge decrease in nectar available along the coasts. Texas, particularly, has been suffering really extreme droughts in recent years. And Texas is kind of like the biggest flyway for monarch butterflies in North America, because you have so many dropping down from the Midwest and so many coming from the east along the coast. And it's really kind of devastating. And again, this is where our impact as citizens and citizen scientists is just so huge for just being able to naturally control nectar sources and certain habitats for monarch butterflies and other migrating creatures, regardless of what the natural weather is doing. Um, so another big problem that I see with monarchs is traditionally there used to be a lot of breeding areas in the Midwest prairies for monarch butterflies. And naturally, in the springtime, a lot of those monarchs are going right through Texas as well and dispersing northward in search of nectar and milkweed. And the prairies used to be one of the best places for milkweeds in the United States. So a lot of them still naturally go there. Um, and of course, today it's a farm belt where there's immense habitat loss. But an even bigger issue is herbicide use in those areas. So the top graph there, top map shows in dark the use of glyphosate in the United States. And I know you guys are all NABA butterfly people, so I won't go into this into too much detail because I know you know the gist. But you can see in the Midwest there just how extreme glyphosate use is in those regions, which heavily impacts those breeding areas of monarchs. And the Cersei Society reports for like egg production in the Midwest is just so devastating. It's so far down. And a lot of people don't realize, is that it's not something that you just spray once and it washes away with the next rain. There's direct contact, indirect contact, contaminated plants, gets into the soil, um, and affects really all insects. And in some cases, glyphosate can stay active in soils for up to 10 years in a lot of these farm areas where it's heavily sprayed. So there's all these different forms of ways that monarchs can become in contact with it and die as a result, or their larvae die as a result, and sometimes even the eggs. Um, Neonicotinoids is another huge kind of insecticide um, that is used. They coat the seeds with it, and when it gets um, combined with a lot of common fungicides, it can be way more toxic than a lot of pesticides that we've banned in the U.S. And ends up just directly impacting the central nervous system of insects, leading to paralysis and death, which is really severe. So, of course, getting the word out about not using herbicides, roundups, things like that, in our communities, to our friends, to our families is huge, on social media, etc. One of the biggest things too is, it sounds silly, but buying organic is such a big impact, um, and sourcing your produce locally is huge. A lot of things that glyphosate is used for is produce and things like alfalfa and hay. And so even if you have farm animals, just buying things locally is huge. And of course, if everybody bought organic, um, our a lot of these companies would look a whole lot different. But it takes one person at a time. Another big impact that affects natural habitat, if it's not habitat loss, is overcrowding of invasive species of plants. Um, I know a lot of you know all about this. 3 really common invasives that we see down here in Cape May. But in some cases, it can be even more severe than that. Cyanantium, for example, that is kind of a loose relative of milkweed. Um, some monarchs will actually lay their eggs on cyanantium, and the larvae will just die because it's not milkweed, because the surface chemicals are similar. So you can see in the stripes just areas with this invasive cyanantium across the U.S. It becomes a problem. So this is really, again, where the magic of wildlife guarding just becomes so imperative. So wavy-lined emerald moth caterpillar there on blue mistflower, actually attaching the petals um, to itself to blend in. There's a lot of gardens at Cape May Point that people have blue mistflower during the fall, so I get to see a lot of these really cool caterpillars. And of course, they'll be on like goldenrods, and they'll stick yellow pieces to themselves too. But um, one of my favorite, one of the most well-known projects for wildlife guarding is Homegrown National Park. Doug Tallamy, if you don't know him already, is an excellent author. Has a lot of really great resources for wildlife guarding if you want to learn more. And he had this idea that about 70% of U.S. land in the United States is privately owned, either by housing or by business. So that's a huge chunk of our landmass. And imagine if everybody had a portion of their land dedicated as a pollinator garden, and just what a big impact that would have as kind of these stepping stones between larger habitats as well. Um, this is just a general list of a lot of common, really fun native plants that you can put in your yard. Um, a lot of these you guys probably know very well. Um, this is more based to kind of South Jersey area actually, but so this just shows a lot of people don't realize is that when you are wildlife gardening and you have native plants, that it's not just for insects, it's for the entire food chain. And in the green there, it shows caterpillars that are used in nests of various songbirds here. So you can see 16 out of 20 bird families almost exclusively use caterpillars to feed their young. Caterpillars are kind of the bottom of the food chain. There's about 700 species of butterflies in the U.S., but you could see 1,000 species of moths just in your own backyard. So by having native plants, you're supporting a whole larger food web of life. So saving them ends up really being up to you. It all starts small. Another big way that you can help monarch butterflies is through sightings logs as a citizen scientist, whether it's something like eBird or the North or South Jersey Butterfly Project, the NAPA sightings page, iNaturalist, Journey North, Oda Not Essential. There's all sorts of other websites out there. Contributing your sightings to websites like this is so much bigger than you would think. A lot of federal and state biologists use that data for conservation. Journey North is a really great monarch reporting system for the springtime. So when you see monarchs that are moving into your area in like April and May, if you could report those to Journey North, they'd greatly appreciate it. And they do a lot of really awesome stuff for monarch conservation in the U.S. Another great thing you can do for New Jersey is this NJ Wildlife Tracker. So the state's really trying to push to do more for monarch conservation this year, creating more habitat for them, getting more data on where they roost and the main areas that they migrate and the main areas that they breed. So this goes really for all any rare insects or any rare wildlife that you see, but you can also report monarch sightings to here, and that'll help with our local state data set. Journey North, this is also something that we partner with the Cape May Bird Observatory, is they do an annual BioBlitz for monarchs across the country, trying to collect breeding data. So it happens every year, usually late July to early August, and you can go out and report monarch larvae, even milkweed habitat, and of course monarchs themselves. And as you can see at the bottom of that, they have a bunch of different partners with the Cersei Society and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Monarch Joint Venture, and they're really great about sharing their data. They do with us, and we do with them. So it's something that I try to bring awareness to every summer. Try to get people out there and figure out where monarchs are breeding so that we can help them. So really, when it comes down to it, it might sound like there's a lot of really big issues out there for monarch butterflies, not only with habitat loss and climate change, but also with the human condition. But you'll also notice that a lot of those really big problems are in ways fixable. And it really takes an army, but one person at a time, we can all come together and help these monarchs, not only in their breeding grounds and in their overwintering grounds, but especially here in New Jersey during their migration, since it's such an important area and such a huge place for them being concentrated that they all need our help. So together we can move forward. And this is just a really awesome mural that's off the back of the National Butterfly Center in Texas. If you've never been to the Rio Grande Valley, they have a wonderful butterfly festival there in the fall, usually in early November. It's a great trip if you're looking for somewhere to go and be with like-minded people and see some cool things. But I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. If we have time or if anybody's interested, I'm happy to answer any specific questions. But I appreciate you all taking the time to be here tonight. And we should be seeing monarchs in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Jack, for the great presentation. We definitely have time for questions. So anyone in the audience, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to put something in the chat, that's an option too.
I have a question. This is Teresa, and
Hey.
I'm just wondering about the. I was thinking about the problem that you brought to our attention about the monarchs migrating a lot later, and I was just wondering, although I'm not necessarily a fan of it, planting annuals or non-native species that go into the fall. I know in my garden I have some things like marigolds and like a chrysanthemum that blooms into November, and often it's really good nectar source. I mean, I know people like Doug Tallamy and myself as a native plant aren't really in favor of that, but would that be a partial solution to that kind of thing? Some of these non-native species can really carry through that, because I can't really think of really, really good native nectar that's still around in late October, November. It's just not there, right?
Yeah, in November it gets extremely sparse. A lot of asters died by the point, and goldenrods, a lot of them are done. Which, yeah, like I was saying, is one of those big issues. But yeah, absolutely. In a lot of cases, things like lantana and Mexican sunflowers, even things like cosmos and blue mist flower in some cases can last really long into the fall. Seems like lantana is almost invincible. um, and generally, those annuals, I do never see any examples of them being invasive at all. A lot of those are native to North America, just farther south, in more subtropical regions. So yeah, no, that's an excellent point. In a lot of places in yards and Cape May Point have a lot of those kinds of annuals, and they source them from areas that don't use neonicotinoids. That's really just the main thing, since those annuals are in such high demand, used so commonly, making sure that you source them from good places is probably the main thing with that.
Any other questions from the audience?
Maybe kind of off topic, but I attended a presentation about the beach nesting birds that turns around Cape May and their dilemma. They need protection also. Any ideas? I know this is off topic.
Yeah, there's a couple organizations that work with the least terns and species like that. Um, there's Conserve Wildlife NJ, there's Nature Conservancy, Fish and Wildlife, of course. Um, Especially in Cape May, it's really, in a lot of areas of Cape May County, just having constant problems with erosion of dunes because these cities are jam-packed really close to the water line, and so there's not a lot of sand to begin with. So there's not a whole lot of land mass for relief when we do get severe weather. I know Public Works in the city does a lot at Cape May Point to kind of move the sand around and try to make it ideal for them. But yeah, it is in some areas, South Jersey is certainly a losing battle, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jack?
Jack? This is Wade. I just want to compliment my friend Jack on a wonderfully very thorough program. Well done, Jack. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
Jack?
Good to hear from you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jack?
I can.
Okay. This is Tom Jewidzik. I just wanted to say I came back from Jacksonville, Florida, and a few days ago I saw 4 monarchs down there in a community park. It's not a question. I just wanted to tell you.
Yeah.
And they looked fairly worn. They weren't really beat up, but they had a lot of lines in the wings. And they weren't fresh.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, like I said, there could have been year-round local butterflies, but this time of year, especially like you said, with them being fresh, they could be migrants pretty soon. Typically, although milkweed usually pops up in early May, April is really the time where we see, at least for like our spring watch projects, where we mostly count migrating birds. We usually see them in the second or third week of April, consistently every year. So a lot of them do show up a little bit earlier than most people would expect. And because they're just moving fast along the coastline, they're usually not detected by most folks. So a lot of people don't see them like in the traditional areas they normally do till May, but a lot of them do show up here in early to mid-April.
Hi, Jack. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes.
I was wondering if you guys are putting transmitters onto monarchs to follow their movements, and if so, what you're learning from there?
Yeah, so they're the Cape May Point Science Center and Cellular Tracking Technologies 2 falls ago really made like the first active transmitter light enough to put on a monarch. It's a bit heavier than the monarch watch tags, closer to 50 milligrams. And for a while, it wasn't really sure whether it was sustainable or not. But last fall, I believe they did have some recoveries in Delaware, like on Delmarva, during the fall. So at least some across the bay. A decent amount of it is still a bit preliminary, but I know Cellular Tracking Technologies also use those transmitters with some projects for the monarchs in California, trying to find more roosts out there. So they're doing the best they can, and it is kind of in the beginning stages, I would say. But you can download a cell phone app called Project Monarch, and if you're within like 100 yards or so of a monarch that has a transmitter, it'll actually pick up through a Bluetooth signal. There's also through Modus towers and Even this new project called the Terra Project, which is like a stationary monitoring device. They're trying to expand as much detection devices as possible, but a huge part of it obviously is similar to the Monarch watch tags, where it needs to be citizen scientists oriented. So if you're interested in downloading that Project Monarch app and using it while you're out and about in the fall, I'm sure they'd greatly appreciate it. So yeah, it's really fantastic, and it's amazing that we're at that point in technology already. But we do assist them with some deployment of those transmitters, and we do work together on some programming. But yeah.
Any last questions from the audience? Not hearing anything. So, Jack, I just want to thank you again for being our speaker and sharing this great topic with everyone.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And that concludes the meeting. So we'll see everyone again in May.
Thanks for a great program. Really, really appreciated that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Absolutely.
All
My
right, thank
pleasure.
you, everyone.
Keep up the good work.